Good morning and welcome back here at Eden. Welcome to those online. Thank you for tuning in, and welcome back to everyone in the room. Great to see you again. We hope you had a really great evening with us at the Eden Project last night and enjoyed your meals. So today we are kicking off with 2 sessions this morning. Yesterday we started with Chris Skidmore hearing about net zero and the journey that the government have been on. We then heard about the energy transition and moved on to nature and technology, and what a debate that was. I love that one, it's my favourite. Dan, what were your key takeaways from yesterday?
Well, I think we can't say anything other than grid for energy, but I think also that the takeout from the Chris conversation is that although everything is moving in the right direction for us, we can't take our foot off the gas on this, or well, that's probably the wrong word to use, gas, the pedal, in terms of continuing to lobby government and continue to push hard, because there are other forces out there that are trying to slow this down or derail it, and we have to be relentless around that approach. And you know, the technology and nature, a brilliant provocation and to start a conversation, but we know we need both. And actually for us, funny enough, we've got some audio equipment in our wildflowers at the moment that are kind of measuring the biodiversity of that site. So that's a perfect example of how technology is supporting nature in that. So terrific, loved it.
Brilliant. Right, I will hand over now to my colleague Jay Mallick from Foresight Group. He works in our infrastructure division, and we will be hearing about the future of food. So over to Jay.
Great, thank you, Lily, and thanks everyone. Good to see you all, and welcome back to day 2 of the Foresight Sustainability Forum. Really pleased to be here today with a very esteemed and uniquely experienced panel. So I'll let them all introduce themselves in a moment. But before that, just to pick up on some of the context that Lily and Dan set. I think yesterday was a fascinating sort of session and some really interesting discourse on net zero, obviously the role of energy, and then sort of how the nature and technology approaches to climate solutions are different, but also intertwined and interrelated. So as we think about system transitions towards sustainability, I think most of us in this room will agree that really what we need to do as a society is to develop a portfolio of solutions. Those will include technology-based approaches, they will include nature-based approaches, there will be a combination. And that will together help affect change. There's no, unfortunately, silver bullet for climate change, but as we work to sort of develop new technologies, scale-proven ones, and pursue other commercially viable approaches to scaling nature and nature-based solutions, we will hopefully avert the crisis and achieve a more sustainable system. So with that, I think to switch focus to the panel today, we will be looking to explore, I'll come to the slide in a second, but we'll be looking to explore technology-driven approaches to sustainable food production and how they can help us avert a global food crisis. And I'll just take a moment to set some very quick context on the problem, and then hopefully as a panel we can go into the more exciting part, which is the solutions. So I'm sure some of this will be familiar to most in the room and hopefully on the virtual channel as well, but food systems, if we broadly look at them as agriculture and aquaculture systems, are currently highly fragmented, inefficient, and environmentally damaging. Supply chains around food, long, interconnected and increasingly vulnerable to both climate impacts and geopolitical shocks that we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months and longer. This all sort of contributes to a system today that's quite stressed. It's not sustainable as it is now, and definitely sort of incapable of meeting the expected demand for food that we will see as population grows in the coming decades. So just this slide, was one that I think is really impactful in a sort of simple sense. And so what we're showing here is the footprint of agriculture, right? So 26% of global emissions come from food. Agriculture uses 50% of global land, 70% of our freshwater resources, causes 80% of global eutrophication or pollution. And that final one there, that is really just quite staggering when you look at it and think about the fact that 94% of all biomass that is not humans is for mammals that are reared to be eaten. So that I think is quite a staggering stat. Moving to the next slide, please. Inefficiency, we've sort of spoken about this, and all those points on the left will be familiar. The point on the right is really interesting, and apologies, probably maybe not clear, but 46% of all crop volumes grown today are used to feed livestock, which, as we know, rare to be eaten. So that is, again, I think a pretty stark example of some of the inefficiencies in the system. If we just quickly transition to the next slide, please. It doesn't unfortunately get much better when we look at oceans. There's a broad spectrum of challenges there, and we'll unpack some of those hopefully. Overfishing and bycatch lead to species extinction, as we know, habitat destruction caused by some really damaging practices like blast fishing, trawling, and then obviously we've got pollution, and at the end, dead zones, which is a result of algae blooms caused by nutrient runoff and the use of pesticides and antibiotics. So a fine kettle of fish. And I think with that, and without further ado, I'd probably just like to open to the panel to provide short introductions, and then we'll kick off with some questions from there. So Dave, would you like to get us going on introductions?
Sure. I'm Dave Chen. Our firm Equilibrium is a investment manager. We were formed in 2007 and 8 along three key components. First of all, everything that we did since our founding was founded on the fact that sustainability, as we define it, is all about changes in the market and therefore about economic advantage. So we don't talk about it in the nomenclature of responsibility. We talk about it in terms of basically a massive set of macro trends, and therefore inefficiencies in information, inefficiencies of capital, and the creation of economic advantage. The second major aspect of what we do is we focus those insights and strategies around two main areas of portfolio development. One is in the sustainable food and agriculture space, of which most recently our work has taken us into the controlled environment agriculture area. So I would say that we're probably among the largest investors in that sector globally. And then the second major portfolio development that we've started as early as 2014 was the area of waste to energy, specifically animal waste, food waste, farm waste to energy. And so today in the US, we're among the largest producers of renewable natural gas, biogas at production scale. And then I think the third component of our strategy has been institutional investor targeting. And so to date, our active funds are about $2 billion. And that's about 85% pegged to pensions and sovereigns. And so one of our key competitive angles has always been to make sure that the work that we do is positioned into the core institutional portfolios.
Thank you so much, Dave. That's very interesting. Sten, would you like to go next?
Yes, please. So my name is Sten Falkum. I'm the CEO of Hima Seafood and also part of a sustainability-driven technology group specialized into designing and building land-based RAS facilities, recycling aquaculture systems. Our team has been designing and built 22 operating RAS facilities in Norway. They're all in operation today. And now we are going the next step, and that is to construct and execute the world's largest freshwater RAS in production. And we will produce a very high quantity of healthy and sustainably produced fish. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Andrew, please.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Andrew Swift from Ferrous Science Limited, which is a major contract research laboratory located just north of York in the UK. which exists as a public-private sector joint venture business. So 50% of what Fera is doing every day of the week is supporting public goods on nature conservation, food safety, food security, biodiversity, and so on. And the other half of our week is spent delivering competitive advantage to new product development, food companies, pesticide and chemicals companies who are trying to find innovative ways to reduce the cost, the environmental cost of food production. Our strapline is protecting you, what you eat, and the world in which we live. And the entire organization is kind of breathing that every day of the week. We're about 55 million turnover. We're running at profit, have been for quite a while. We even paid the government a dividend from our performance last year, which was the first time ever. So quite a milestone for us. So it's great to be here. Thanks for asking us along, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. And last but not least, Jamie.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Foresight and Eden Project for putting this event on. I'm Jamie Burrows. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Vertical Future, and we're a leading vertical farming technology and data company. We've been around for about 7 years now, a team of about approaching 100, and effectively we design, build, deploy, and also manufacture different types of vertical farming technologies, not just focused on food for human consumption, but also things like carbon capture, animal feed, nutraceuticals, pharmaceuticals, and so on. So quite broad, and very pleased to be on this panel.
Great, thank you. Well, maybe just to start with you then, Jamie, and we'll work our way around. So when we obviously introduced some of those stats around agriculture, and when you think about the agricultural system today, what are those challenges that you've set out to address at Vertical Future, and what are the most important, I guess, sustainability benefits of controlled environment agriculture that you'll continue to innovate towards?
Sure. So I think some of them were covered off at the beginning here, but I'll probably go through them again in brief. But I think one of the biggest challenges facing agriculture globally is the interconnected nature of global crop production systems that's proliferated over time. And the impact that has on price, on availability, on the quality of the kind of products that we are consuming or are feeding to animals or whatever sector we're looking at. Linked to that, you've got massive issues around soil degradation, and obviously that's being addressed in other parts of agriculture, and there's been some good productivity there. Insect populations are dying out. There's been massive overuse of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, which inevitably have a huge impact on things like human health, and have been linked to some pretty bad diseases, especially in emerging markets. Then a particular one for me, which is very important, is around water. So a lot of the panels I do are focused on water. People talk about vertical farming, and yes, we do use a lot of energy, and that's something that's being worked on, and being linked to clean energy is very, very important. But water, especially in the Middle East and markets where vertical farming is needed the most, or more broader controlled environment ag, water is, for me, the biggest issue that we need to tackle. So I think overall the challenge is it's just a very fragile area to look at, especially when you look at things like grains, which vertical farming hasn't quite addressed yet, and you need massive scale and advancements in crop science for that. But I think in terms of benefits of CEA, for me, I kind of sum it up by saying that it allows us to change the rules of crop production that have existed since as far back as we, have records. It's ethical, so by not using these chemicals indoors, and we get to create better, higher quality products that are better for human health. We get to remove any variability that exists when you're growing outside. And just a couple of really brief examples of that. We just produced some really good research around very typical crop, basil, which I think every vertical farm in the world seems to grow, but it's a good example. And one of the big issues that retailers face is basil typically can't be transported in the same, for example, delivery truck as other crops, because it'll blacken, because it prefers 12 degrees plus, whereas other crops are transported at 4 to 6 degrees. Now, by using technology in our systems and using specific wavelengths at different times of growth, we've enabled us to actually create a strain of basil which can be transported in the same delivery trucks as other crops, which obviously saves money for retailers and so on, and extend shelf life by 3 to 4 days. That's one very basic example of how you can use technology in a vertical farm, which it's impossible to do outside or indeed in a greenhouse. And then a second one would be increasing the bricks content in strawberries, again through light. Bricks is obviously where we get the flavor, the sweetness of the strawberries. And a third is around robotics. So for me, robotics are important in vertical farms because they allow us to limit the number of interactions that humans have with crops, which has a knock-on impact in terms of food safety. So I'll finish by saying it's not you said at the beginning, it's not a silver bullet. This is a cross-industry approach. We're doing projects now where you have vertical farms integrated with glass houses, integrated with traditional broadacre farming, and they're turned on and off during particular times of the year to create a better curve. So it's not a silver bullet there, and it's also a lot of people think that it's counterintuitive to think that it's healthier or more natural to grow a crop indoors. But if we look at everything we're doing, the fact we have a roof over our heads, the fact that we're wearing clothes, everything that we've done throughout human history has used technology to push things forward. And why not do the same thing for crops?
Thank you. Some really interesting thoughts there that we'll no doubt pick up. If I move this way to Sten, perhaps, Sten, are you able to walk us through, for the audience, recirculating aquaculture systems and how they can serve as a powerful climate solution? It will focus on sort of enhancing the quality, reliability, and sustainability of fish production.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so we are fully agreeing that it is a very powerful solution because it's highly scalable, and that's why it's so important in this forum to discuss this solution. So when it comes to the quality aspect, we will be serving 100% sashimi graded quality product, a premium product which is not in place in stores today, 4 kilo on average. And we don't use any chemicals or medicine in the production. So it's a completely clean product, meaning also that our byproducts are also clean without any medicine or antibiotics. Also, when you're doing a land-based system, you're able to harvest every day, meaning that you could reduce food waste and tailor the supply to meet the demand. And it's a beautiful fish to start with. Trout, if you like salmon, you love trout. That's what we're saying in Norway. And I think that is a good way to describe it. Very good texture. One step up in quality or in redness scale, which is attractive when doing salmonoids. So it's truly a very fresh and great product in itself. The reliability is secured by the technology. Just as vertical farming, we are able to control the environment. And what we are doing in a modern ROS facility is to mimic nature. And in fact, we are so successful in the most operating ROS facilities in doing that it indicates that it's 40 times lower mortality rate in a land-based ROS facility on freshwater than in nature. And the reason is not too surprising, because for a fish, it's all about the elements. So we are controlling, we don't have the weather conditions as you have in the sea-based production today. We protect the animal against harsh weather, making sure that it doesn't get stressed or of that element. Also, predators are continuously hunting for fish in the sea-based aquaculture. We don't have that. We protect the animal for that kind of enemies. Also, for fish, it's often too warm in summer and too cold in winter, because it's swimming in the surface and naturally they are not able to go down. So we are able to control the temperature completely at its favorite for that species. So we also don't have pathogens and viruses, diseases, like you have in the sea. We have a vaccination place ready, but we don't know what to vaccinate against. So that's a very good aspect of doing controlled. So we don't have any sea lices, which is causing extremely hurt for the fish, and it's a very painful action to remove it. I come from that industry trying to help the fish farmers remove lices, and it was not very good to see. So it is a much more gentle environment that's also backed very heavily by 20 years of research. And that's also a very good thing about reliability. And since we're doing freshwater ROS, we're not containing or we're reducing the biological risk tremendously, because saltwater develops this dangerous gas called H2S, which can destroy or kill fish very quickly in a ROS facility. But when doing freshwater, you have mitigated that risk at a very significant level. So now it's a very stable, reliable, and a very good place for the fish to stay. And fish welfare is of paramount importance to Hima Seafood. We think the next generation will focus much more on how the animal has been farmed, and we will lift that important aspect, and also daring to set guarantees and to be measured on how we're doing on fish welfare. And we know that it's a very growing concern. And the sustainability of the product is obvious. Trout do not use any energy almost to fight gravity, because it floats. And it doesn't use much energy to regulate temperature, because we provide the perfect temperature. So meaning that it consumes the least amount of feed per unit produced food of all the competing categories in the food production, animal protein production. So since we are using only 1 kilo to feed 1 kilo of trout, or to produce 1 kilo trout, 14% of what you are spending on feed for cow production, we are also the lowest in class of CO2 footprints. Right. And in addition, we are able to extract the CO2, almost all the CO2 that we are producing while the fish is breathing in the water. We are able to extract that and put that into sequestering medium.
Perfect. Thank you. And that's really interesting. I want to pick up on some of those points as we come back, definitely. Andrew, if I can throw you across to you. So with your wide perspective around the environmental cost of food production, food security, safety, certification, are you able to outline some of the emerging opportunity sets for new technologies that are coming through in sustainable food? And just to drop a few, but alternative proteins would have been something the audience has no doubt heard about, microalgae production, cultured meats, all of these kind of new technologies.
Well, yeah, thank you. I'll try. I think as this event really calls out, for those of us who inherit the planet after us, there's a driver to do this urgently. But as has been said countless times yesterday and today, there's no silver bullet here. So we're of the view that very many innovations across the whole food system and worldwide need to be devised, developed, and adopted for impact. You've mentioned 3 in the introductory question there: insects, cultured meat, microalgae. We've also heard about aquaculture, controlled environment farming. You could add advances in legume and plant-based protein production. Now in the UK, being able to incorporate genetic engineering and precision breeding to enhance yield and reduce environmental impacts. So there are many options available, and on the face of it, this kind of looks like a straightforward R&D task in some respects, but there are very significant challenges, some more obvious than others. So I think we need to recognize that we don't just need alternative proteins per se. What humankind needs are fully formulated novel foods, which are diets rich in vitamins, nutrients, fibers, and essential fats and lipids as well. So we shouldn't be blinded by the attractive economics of, for example, producing cell-cultured meat, or the miracles in formulating its taste, odor, and texture, if that cell-cultured meat then requires a shopping list of additives to render it equivalent in health and dietary value as conventional livestock. Similarly, we don't just need any plant-based solution either. Several fully formulated plant-based alternatives are actually more additive unhealthy than existing conventional food products. So Henry got this right with the food strategy, talking about the de-emphasis on processed food and the return to more simplified diets.
Yes.
We think that consumer education and consumer sentiment is absolutely critical, whether those are high net worth consumers investing in organizations and funds or people browsing the supermarket aisle. Yeah. Novel foods, don't forget, also present a threat to heritage food, which can close market access. So watch out. It was in the news only 2 weeks ago that Italy's banned the introduction of lab-produced meat in order to preserve the sacrosanct heritage of Italian authentic food. So there are cultural reactions to some of this as well, as trade-driven, which can be very important. Whether it's for lab-based meat applications or for the use of GE in novel food formulations, our view is that mandatory labeling for consumer choice is key. In any event, none of these will ever take off without compelling investment economics. We're hearing about controlled agriculture, we're hearing about the temperature control of trout farms, but there are significant energy and water costs coupled into these activities. So our view is that not only should we apply and it's fair to apply conventional financial accounting ROIs to these developments, but also carbon accounting it should be an equally balanced part of the formula to decide the investment criteria. Absolutely. We will get there with a very large number of incremental gains in both novel and established food production. Our view is that innovations have a role to play, but so do conventional foods when they are farmed responsibly. Yeah. It's the intensive piece of intensive agriculture which is the damaging piece that needs to be addressed through innovation as well. So it's not just innovative products, innovative proteins, it's innovative processes for conventional products which in our view can make a difference.
Great, no, thank you. That's thank you, really interesting thoughts. And with that sort of balance of the opportunity set for sustainable food, love to come to Dave. And Dave, thank you so much for your patience. We might switch focuses slightly here and just ask you about, in your experience as such an experienced infrastructure and real assets investor, what are the investment characteristics that you look for when assessing controlled environment food production? And what role do you think infrastructure investors have to play in this upcoming transition towards a sustainable food system?
I think that there's a unifying theme that's on the stage right now, and anywhere in the world where you get three farmers gathered together for a cup of tea in the morning or a cup of coffee, I can almost guarantee that in the first 10 seconds of their sitting down together, that the conversation will turn to the weather. Mm-hmm. All right, and that's because weather is the number one predictor of agricultural quality and quantity. It's why all the jokes that you see in movies about the storm in Brazil and now the commodity markets for orange juice go nuts. Because the weather is the number one determinant of quality and quantity. And I think the thing that we worry about most is twofold. One is that there's a lot of attention being paid to climate change, and when you look at those curves, they're always smooth, monotonic to the right curves. But what you ought to be really paying attention to is climate volatility, which is interday, interseasonal, and inter-year. And if the data, which is now pretty conclusive, is that we are actually seeing greater volatility, and it's not just the hurricanes. It's spikes in interday humidity, interday cloud cover versus sun coverage. It's really hard to ripen things if you don't get enough sun and you don't get enough temperature. And like I always joke, it's really hard to move a hunk of dirt. And so last night we had the benefit of sitting in what was known as the Mediterranean biosphere, which is the most beautiful climate to grow vegetables and produce and the things that we actually eat. And that's why California is so important to the United States and frankly to the world, all right, and other parts of the Mediterranean. But if volatility is increasingly a factor, you can't count on the stability of the Mediterranean climate. All right. So the theme here is that we are seeing, and ag is, as I always say, ground zero for climate change, climate volatility. All right. So I think that's the unifying theme. And so in a very real way, we're kind of screwed. And so we are now in the realm of climate adaptation infrastructure. And as much as we are going to reduce carbon, we are now faced with the fact that we're now managing and adapting to the climate conditions that we're being given.
Yes.
All right. So I think that in many ways, and I'll just point to the vertical farm. To coin a phrase, there are no silver bullets, there's a silver buckshot. And I think that what we're going to be seeing in field agriculture, especially in the agriculture of the things we eat, and as most of you know, about 95% of what is grown is not for human consumption. Right? But the things that we eat, we are going to increasingly see protection of our fields, whether that's extremely low tech, which is in the form of netting and protection over large scale fields and orchards, all the way through to plastic coverings, hoop houses, all the way through to high tech glass house, of which is probably the dominant technology over the course of the last 30 years. And then all the way to vertical farms, complete indoor, complete management of all the environmental factors. And what we will do is we will learn to adapt each of those tools to specific applications. All right. So I think that one of the disservices of the last 5-6 years is a false sense of competition. And you should be really looking at them as technology S-curves and the application of very specific S-curves then to very specific problem sets that we're trying to solve. You had asked, what are the other changes that we're seeing? What are the other, complications? I think that the field of controlled environment agriculture includes all those aspects that I've just articulated, as well as the controlling of our water environments, and that includes both saltwater and freshwater. And increasingly, as investors, I think that the questions that we're going to be asking as agricultural investors over the last few years have become increasingly clear. And I'll sort of just paint out, I think the very first question that as an investor, when you're challenged or presented with a deal, is to ask, is the company or the technology or the technique that I'm being presented being positioned as a CEA technology, so a tech provider, or are they a tech-enabled farmer? And those are two very fundamentally different business models. Yes. They have two fundamentally different sources of leverage, and they have fundamentally different sources of margin and scaling capabilities. You should be asking, is the valuation that I'm basing my investment on based on tech-driven economics, like software?
Yes.
Or is it an EBITDA and a growth-driven set of valuations, which is typically the kind of thing that you would do with a widget manufacturer, in which case the widget in this case is a tomato or a fish, all right? And I think there's been a lot of confusion over the last 5 years of business models that try to do both, all right? I think that even within the CEA operating company, the farmer, there are two business models that are emerging, and implicit within that is some of the core competencies of how these industries will evolve. One is, are you a huge farmer, in which case you are not seeing your way all the way to the marketplace, or are you a vertically integrated marketeer with a control of your genetics? All right, in which case you're taking advantage of a insourcing value chain. And again, economics, mode of operation, mode of competition is wildly dependent upon the answer to that question. And then the last one, and I think this is something that was missed in the first wave of venture-oriented ag tech and CEA investments, and that is, did that company have a proper CFO that was thinking thoroughly to the scaling of that company? And this last one is, I think, critically important. You'd be shocked and somewhat amused. Everybody has the same first 5 minutes of pitch. 8 billion people, my God, we have to feed them all. All right, and then then it degenerates immediately to two things. I'm going to produce a premium product, and a lack of real understanding about scale. All right, so I'll give you just some numbers just to make it come home. The largest salad producer in the United States is $6 billion in revenue and consumes 3.5 million pounds of leafy greens a year in their product, 3.5 billion, all right? The entire US production of CEA right now is less than 100 million pounds. And that's just a salad maker. All right, so the scaling and the capital needs, and then the balance sheet structure to consume that amount of capital, in order to actually even move the needle from 100 million pounds to 3.5 million pounds, is probably somewhere around about $10 to $15 billion. All right, of capex. And so the ability to operationally scale, and then the ability to actually structurally scale, to actually be even close to even thinking about feeding the masses, all right, are huge issues that this industry is yet to deal with.
Yes.
All right. I'll just stop there in terms
Thank you so much. Yeah, those are some really interesting thoughts. Sten, maybe I'll come back to you, and we've obviously spoken at length about sort of the importance of circular economy linkages and all the good work that you and the team are doing there. Are you able to sort of illustrate some of these positive linkages for the audience, and in the context of perhaps your first farm? And I believe there's a slide that we might have. Yes. Perfect.
So I would love to walk you through that. So I talked a little bit in my last section about the trout itself, and what we have learned over the last year is that the current food systems, the agriculture and the aquaculture systems, are fully utilized. And we know that in the next couple of decades, we have to increase food production with 60%. We cannot cut down more forest in order to make more agricultural land. Everybody's agreeing to that. We cannot wild catch more fish from oceans. It's 2.5 times overfished at the moment. We cannot expand aquaculture in sea, which is a big contributor to the protein market, due to the fact that it's increasing sustainability issues. First of all, sickness or pathogens, but also the fact that all nutrients from the production is released to the sea, creating this over-nutrification. So circularity is what motivates us as a food producer. So it has to be on the food selection itself. We are going into a situation where we have to economize. We have to prioritize food sources that are consuming lower amounts of natural resources than we are doing today. In that sense, we can create extra capacity in the existing world. The other thing that we are concerned about is to exploit all the waste stream, or what we call byproducts, of course. So starting on the right side, the water after this 8,000 metric ton, and that's a big volume. It's equivalent to 70,000 full-grown hogs produced every year from this facility. That's a big volume of food. So that water is containing, since we're not using any chemicals or any medicine, the water is very clean, but it's packed with nutrients. And that nutrients can be led to a neighboring vertical plant or algae plant, which sequester or drag down CO2. That's a very positive thing about algae, but also produces a very valuable food product in itself. And what does it also do? It removes nitrogen, which is causing these dead zones, as you were explaining in the start. So we are then putting businesses, industrial, large companies farming algae need nitrogen-rich water, also containing phosphor, removing those nitrogen, growing healthy food, and what we're leaving out from that stage is clean water, basically.
Okay.
Disinfected, and it doesn't hurt any wildlife. But the other byproduct is made possible by the technology, because a RAS system, in addition to creating the best optimal environment for the fish, it also enables us to recollect all the solids in the water phase. And and those solids are dried up to 80-90% dried material and can be spread for a farmer, neighboring farmer, or shipped to a place where it's needed. And that forms the best organic fertilizer known to humankind. Because it contains 350,000 unique microelements, which is very helpful to the soil. So the vegetables are getting healthier, containing more microelements that the human nature needs. We're adapted to those micronutrients. And it has a range of other positive factors. And we were talking that there is no silver bullet, but Rodel Institute, which is a 70-year-old recognized institute, has recently produced a paper saying that using organic farming methods, also called regenerative aquaculture, could draw down 100% of the CO2 gases that are currently in the atmosphere.
Right.
Meaning that, and in order for regenerative agriculture to be a success and to be widely adopted in all countries, you need organic fertilizer. That's the only outside or significant outside factor that farmers need in order to turn to regenerative agriculture. It's organic fertilizer. And we are providing a very clean and very high volume of that material, which is necessary for a very important transition in the agriculture space. And that regenerative agriculture is also solving a lot of the other crises. Because when you're doing regenerative agriculture, you are stopping to till the soil. You're not plowing anymore, and that stops very much of the release of CO2 gases from the tilling practices. That's a good thing for the CO2 emission problem. Also, you use rotational holistic grazing, meaning that you also are solving the animal welfare situation in much of the industrial food producers, because we are not treating the animal in a good way. On general, it can be massively improved, and this farming method is improving welfare because you're using the animals to graze, which they are supposed to do, and that is a happy cow life or a good life for a sheep or chicken. So, and the last big solution that this agriculture farming method is solving is biodiversity. Because when you are using organic farming, biodiversity comes back immediately. It goes 2 years, and the birds and the insects, the earthworms, are back in place. Today we are farming chemical-based with pesticides, sterilizing everything else than the vegetable itself, which is genetically improved to withstand the pesticides. So this method is a sustainable bundle of sustainability issues. It can solve the climate crisis. It can improve dramatically animal welfare. It brings back 100% the biodiversity. That is how nature works. And for me, that seems like a silver bullet. So the thing that we are most proud of is that we are producing this product here, because this is dark green, this is what the soil needs. Yeah. And the last point, just to before I leave the word to others, is that the soil quality is what probably is going to hit us the first. UN has now stated that we have 60 harvests left, then we're left with sand. And why is that happening? Yes, because since 1950, we've been using artificial fertilizer, and that practice is eating out organic matter from the soil. Yeah. And the only difference between sand and soil is organic matter. Yes. And this is organic matter in high volume. So every kilo produced trout, we are able to give or sell 0.5 kilo to regenerative farmers over the world. And that is very proud.
Thank you so much, Sten. That's really fascinating, and such a good example of what we were discussing yesterday about how nature-based and technology-based approaches can work together, can feed off of each other, and can be developed in a conjoint way. So thank you for outlining those. I might come back to you, Jamie, sort of and switch focuses slightly again. Obviously, this is a new sector, so we've been discussing lots of new propositions and developments, and lots of good, healthy entrepreneurship required. And you've been through that process, obviously, so successfully. Looking back, if you could, at when you started Vertical Future, what were some of the sort of challenges that you faced in sort of establishing and scaling up a controlled environment food production business?
Where to begin?
And sorry, I should just say, maybe after that, we'd love to take questions from the audience. So please do start thinking on the virtual channels as well. We'd love to hear from you. Sorry.
Sure. So, it's been a very exciting 7 years. As you say, it's been a very new sector. I think, obviously the Americans led the way probably 15, 16 years ago. But obviously CEA has been around for much, much longer. So this has kind of been our maybe second or third wave of the industry. So I guess I'll approach this question from a couple of different viewpoints. I think from a capital raising viewpoint, it's very important, especially with us being a very technology-led business, to raise requisite amount of capital to actually build the systems, to be able to innovate, to then hit the proof points for the investors. And those proof points actually change over time. So at the beginning, when you're kind of pre-seed, the investors want to see the founders all in. For me, I took a full floating debenture over all my assets. So I lose everything if the business goes under. But then as you kind of mature as a business within this sector, and again, you could say the same for not just CEA, any business, things change. So it starts to become proof points around having a good management team, making sure that if you want to scale from 100 square meter farm to 10,000 square meters to 100,000 square meters, which is where we need to be getting to actually in this sector to reach price parity. That's very, very challenging, and that's probably been one of the biggest things for us. And I think the thing that's made that very challenging is there's been, to put it politely, a lot of hot air in this sector, and a lot of that has been driven by the Americans. I can say that because I'm half American, and it hasn't been helpful for the overall industry. So I think there needs to be more honesty about what can be delivered in CEA, and this is not a sector where you make a quick buck, and I think it was initially presented that way, where VCs would come in, they would expect a 2 to 3 year return. Great, let's grow microgreens and sell them at 20 times market price. I think we're now past that. Some people are still doing it, but we're getting past that. So that's had an impact on companies that are trying to do things what I would say the proper way, focusing on scale. And then probably just the last point is the continuous effort that's required around integrating crop science with really hard engineering and genetics and what else is going on in the sector to actually and then also translating that into data and into evidence that investors can digest in a very easy way. So lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities as well, I think, for the sector.
Great, thank you so much. That's very helpful. So with that, would like to open up to the room.
Hello. In addition to these 2 excellent days of discussion, there's also 2 days of discussion in number 10 about horticulture in the UK. What is the panel's thoughts on the unique challenges that the UK faces and how CEA can help address some of those challenges, but particularly the wider interconnected landscape that exists in the UK and the horticulture industry in the UK?
Great. Andrew, or
I'll offer one quick comment, which is a very interesting question in the week where the government's just scrapped its horticulture strategy.
anyone else?
I can.
Yeah.
Well, I think traditionally, if you look at countries across the globe, horticulture in the UK, food pricing has been on the floor, and it's also a very competitive market. So introducing innovations and addressing, the food crisis or whatever we want to call it, has been far more difficult for us. I don't think there's been much capital availability. I think energy prices going up at crazy rates have really not been helpful. So I do see the UK has been one of the most challenging markets. And speaking to my sector, to CEA, the viability of it changes dramatically depending on the geography. Projects in the Middle East, where we're focused mostly on the Middle East actually, are far easier to deliver, despite the fact that water's a big issue out there. But the UK certainly has a lot of challenges. I think energy's been one of the biggest ones.
I was reading yesterday, it costs in the UK 30 pence to grow a cucumber in the current economy, and you can import them at 17 pence.
Yeah.
So the economics start to dictate the rules of the game, which is can't be right.
Yes.
I think that we as humans oftentimes want to see things in black and white, or we tend to swing from one extreme to the next in terms of reaction. But I think the thing that COVID has done is it has heightened food security and food resilience. And I don't think this is a swing towards complete walking away from globalization. I don't think we're going to be growing massive scale bananas here in the UK. But I do think that it has heightened the grocers' awareness of food resiliency, food system resiliency. And you see that happening. In the US, we're 80, 90%, depending on the food type, on California. And a very thin slice of Arizona on the California border, which is a single point of failure. All right, and so the big swing, because we have a consolidated food service and grocery structure where 60-70% of the market share is contained within a handful of consolidated endpoints. This notion of growing to regional resiliency, or an ag system that can support one region to the next if one fails, I think is something that has become a structural drive for most of the retailers and the food service folks. I don't think that you guys in the UK last year saw lettuce shortage, where you were allowed to buy 1 or 2 units going out of the store of certain product. I don't think any of us envisioned that would ever happen in our lifetime. It's just not part of our scenario. And I think that's so in the UK, I think that there will be a continued drive to regional supply chain, regionally managed. And we talk about CEA as it's new. Frankly, you've got some of the best tomato producers here inside of Glass House. You certainly have it across the channel into the Netherlands. You have some of the best indoor strawberry producers here in the greater UK, between Ireland and here. All right, and so the art of growing in protected shelter, in glass house, is alive and well here. And if the drive to food supply resiliency is the trend, you're going to see a continued growth of that. And in those industries, in those sectors and models, scale matters. And you're going to continue to see that.
Great, thank you, Dave. I think there were some more questions here. Maybe just conscious of time, maybe we can take a couple of questions together and then the panel can respond.
Fascinating stuff, but 17 million hectares of UK farmland at 150,000 farms, majority of them farming intensively, creating and growing grains using synthetic fertilizers, putting them on trucks, taking them to other farms where the animals live, on concrete, sweeping the rubbish into pits. What's the future for the vast majority of farmers in this country, and what will technology do to help them?
Thank you, really important question. I think there was one from Dan at the back, and maybe we can then respond. Dan at the back, maybe.
Just one question on climate resilience and controlled environment production, kind of at the extremes. So as we, in particular in respect of kind of heat events, obviously as open field agriculture becomes difficult or impossible in places like southwestern US or southern Europe, and we're increasingly reliant on glasshouses in particular, just how the panel sees the kind of resilience of those assets in particular to heat events in future, and is ultimately the answer that it's all okay as long as you have enough energy, as in, we will end up with air-conditioned greenhouses, for example, or is there a limit to what controlled environment can do in terms of resilience in those kind of situations?
Thanks, Dan. Fascinating question. Should we maybe tackle the first one?
I could maybe, if I could just give comments to how will the future food production look like. And I think it has to be, we have to go back to the ways that we have done it 7,000 years in front, using organic matter, spreading that back to the soil, recycling. That's what farming has been like, treating the animal good, and recycling all things that are coming out from the farming practices.
How do you get them to do that?
Because it's profitable. It's super profitable. Research now shows that only in the US, farmers in the US could increase profits by 100 billion annually by going from conventional farming to organic farming or regenerative. So it will happen by itself because consumers will prioritize to buy products that are containing a lot of important vitamins, minerals, micronutrients. This is very obvious to a lot of professionals today. This will hit the consumer market at a big swing. So I think the future for food production will be very, very positive. We are done with conventional, the growth in conventional farming using chemicals. And I think it will be a very positive future and enabled by technology for some, but also going back to old methods as we have done before 1950.
Thanks, Sten.
Dan.
Did anyone else want to, and then we'll come, Dave, to answer the resiliency question. Anyone else wanted to add comments to that?
I think if you dig deeply, you'll find the Pareto rule applies to the farm outputs of the UK, and that 20% of the farming population is responsible for 80% of the output. So we need to recognize the fact there's some dead wood in the system, and is that land better used for nature recovery, flood control, public goods? So I think the way that the thought process went into ELMS and the repositioning of the CAP for the single farm subsidy for rewarding different incentives, farming for carbon, I personally think is entirely laudable. And I think the point that Sven makes about the commercial viability is really important too. This seems to get lost in the noise everywhere I go as well. oh, it's either or, and you know, the farmer's going to be persuaded to produce regenerative farming practices at a hit to the yield or an economic disadvantage. That shouldn't be the case. I mean, people can replace pesticide use with biopesticide use and increase yield and increase the economics of the farm. The fastest growing country in the world to adopt biopesticides, replacing conventional pesticides, is Brazil. And how many people would have figured that out? So I don't believe that there's a compromise to be made on the economic viability of a farm by adapting to nature-based or regenerative practices. But there is a tremendous amount of education needs to take place with the community affected.
Regen ag is about 0.5% of UK farms.
Today.
Yes, today.
Today.
But, for example, Danone, which is one of the multinational French dietary producer, has now turned 150,000 hectares from conventional farming to regenerative. And they are a giant, and when they are doing that, that's because it's the best for the environment, for the animals, and for profitability. So this will happen by itself.
Dave, you wanted to maybe add some comments?
Dan, I think that if you step back, you know, across ag, and it's no different than CEA, the three great agricultural inputs are water, energy, and labor. And we're challenged in all three of them. And so I think that as we move into the next generation of CEA and the massive expansion, I mean, Northern Europe is already very, very dominated by CEA for a lot of the vegetables that are eaten. But as we continue to see the infrastructure build out, you know, water is probably the one that is most well understood within indoor growing, but energy is frankly the dirty little secret, all right, which is it's a huge consumer of energy. And after human labor, it's the second highest cost structure. That being said, time and time again in the last 5 years, we've seen that when you put your mind to it, you can cut the energy per kilogram output or per meter squared of output by anywhere between 30% and more. And so one of the reasons that we're one of the largest operators and owners of greenhouses in North America. You know, we signed an agreement with Priva last year that over the course of the next 3 years, we will work with Priva, the #1 dominant climate management system, to cut in the next 3 years energy per kilogram or increase the productivity per BTU input by 30% over the course of the next 3 years. And then that over the course of the next 5 years, we'll try to drive to 50%. The funny thing is, because of the energy spikes that we've seen in the last 24 months, or specifically in the last 18, given the Ukraine situation, that's exactly actually what's happened in Holland. They've cut their energy footprint in the greenhouse industry by about 30%. So we know that this can be baked into the technology platform and into protocols. The second thing is, given climate volatility, there's a misnomer or misconception that because we're quote unquote controlling the environment, that can all be done through the computer. That also is a mistake. And so I think that what we're going to see over the course of the next couple, 3 years is the increasing adoption of automated, I'll call it heuristics, based on data that's now starting to be, you know, codified and calculated into greater and greater machine assistance in the management of the greenhouse climate, so that the inside is not as reactive or can forecast the outside. And that also has a huge impact on the energy footprint. All right? So I think the next couple, 3 years are going to be incredibly active.
Thanks, Dave. And I think we're coming up to time, but maybe just final comments from the rest of
One
the
very
panel.
interesting addition to what Dave just said there. I don't know if you all noticed it, but the UK's biggest tomato producer was acquired a month ago, APS Tomatoes, headquartered in Cheshire. And they were acquired by P3P Energy, an energy company. And I don't know if you've come across that before. It's the first time I've seen a major food producer being acquired by an energy company who see it as a way to deploy energy solutions. So it reinforces your point hugely.
And I think that's one of the key messages. And look, agriculture is one of the most, I'll use a funny word, romantic industries. It pulls on a heartstring. We love the 1 acre farmer, all right? But where the industry is also going is that we do need to preserve that from a community and societal structure standpoint. But where the industry is going is greater and greater infrastructure and consolidation, all right? And I think that's probably one of the major trends that's taken place, again, in the last 12 to 24 months, is the consolidation of the CEA industry.
I just had a question about, or a comment about the water, because I agree with Dave and the rest of that. That is extremely important, and also a side aspect of this regenerative agriculture. Because what's causing the most troubles to the coastal areas in the sea and also rivers is the excessive use of artificial fertilizer. That you have to use 50% more fertilizing values than the soil and the plant itself can take up. And that 50% is ending up in a river and out in the coastal ocean, and there where it destroys all marine life. While using regenerative methods, you are able to fix that problem as well, because organic fertilizer are binding to the soil. It's being dragged down by earthworm and biodiversity in the soil, and it actually immediately stops raining off to oceans. So it also solves a very important aspect when it comes to clean water.
Great. Well,
Yep.
Thank you. And then maybe we'll stop it there, conscious of the time. So with that, just a massive thank you to the panel for all your thoughts and contributions, and for making it here today and traveling to do that. So with that, I found that to be really helpful and fascinating. Hope the audience did too. And yeah, we'll leave it there.